Hello, you're listening to a recording of Soulmates by Tutu Sene. No part of this publication may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form or by any means, including photocopying, recording, or any electronic or mechanical methods without the prior written permission of the author. This book was narrated by Brian Okoye. Chapter 1. In the gleaming towers of Accra's business district, Daniel Asante stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, surveying the construction sites that dotted the city's skyline like monuments to his success. At 32, he was the youngest CEO in Ghana's construction industry, having inherited and transformed his father's company into a million-dollar empire that built everything from luxury hotels to government infrastructure. Daniel had everything a man could want: wealth, power, respect, and the kind of confidence that came from never having been denied anything he truly desired. His tailored suits were imported from London, his cars were the latest German engineering, and his penthouse apartment overlooked the Atlantic Ocean. But there was something restless in his dark eyes as he watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, something that suggested all his material success hadn't filled a void he couldn't quite name. "Sir," his assistant's voice came through the intercom. "The car is ready for the Okafor reception." Daniel straightened his tie and checked his reflection in the window. Tonight's event was more than just another social gathering. It was a carefully orchestrated business meeting disguised as a celebration. Chief Okafor, one of Ghana's most influential politicians, was hosting a reception for his daughter, Amara's latest fashion show. And Daniel's father had made it clear that this was an opportunity not to be missed. The Okafors are old family friends. Samuel Asante had told his son over lunch the previous week. Chief Okafor's support could open doors for us in the government contract sector. And his daughter, well, she's accomplished, beautiful, and from the right kind of family. It's time you started thinking about marriage, Daniel. A man in your position needs the right kind of wife. Daniel had nodded politely, as he always did when his father offered advice about his personal life. Samuel Asante was a formidable man who had built his construction empire from nothing, and Daniel respected his business acumen. But there were times when Daniel felt like he was living someone else's life, following a script that had been written for him before he was old enough to have opinions of his own. Chapter 2. Meanwhile, 300 miles away in Lagos, Nigeria, David Mensah was putting the finishing touches on architectural drawings that will transform a neglected neighborhood into a sustainable community center. His office was smaller than Daniel's, located in a converted warehouse in Lagos Island, but it buzzed with the creative energy of young architects and urban planners who shared his vision of building a better Africa through thoughtful design. David had built his firm, Mensah Architectural Design, on the principle that architecture should serve communities, not just wealthy clients. His projects focused on affordable housing, schools, and community centers that used local materials and traditional building techniques enhanced by modern engineering. He wasn't as wealthy as some of his contemporaries, but his work had earned him recognition throughout West Africa as an innovator who understood how to balance progress with cultural preservation. At 32, David was strikingly handsome in a way that was both approachable and distinguished. His mother, Grace Mensah, often told him he had inherited his father's strong jawline and intelligent eyes, though she had never told him much else about the man who had abandoned them when David was born. Grace had worked multiple jobs to put David through architecture school, and he had never forgotten the sacrifices she had made for his success. "David," called Sarah Williams, his project manager and closest friend. "Are you planning to work all night again?" You know there's a vault outside this office, right? David looked up from his drawings and smiled. Sarah was one of the few people who could tease him about his workaholic tendencies without offense. They had met in architecture school and had been friends for over a decade, though David sometimes wondered if Sarah's feelings ran deeper than friendship. "I'm almost finished," David replied, stretching his back. "This community center project is too important to rush. These families deserve our best work." "They also deserve an architect who doesn't collapse from exhaustion," Sarah pointed out. "When's the last time you went to a social event that wasn't related to work?" David considered the question and realized he couldn't remember. His social life had taken a backseat to his career, partly because he was passionate about his work and partly because he had never met anyone who made him want to prioritize romance over professional achievement. Chapter 3. "Actually," Sarah continued, "I have an invitation that might interest you. There's a reception tomorrow night in Accra for a fashion designer named Amara Okafor. She's been incorporating traditional West African textiles into contemporary designs, and I thought you might appreciate her approach to honoring cultural heritage while embracing innovation." David looked up with genuine interest. "Okafor? Isn't that the political family?" "Her father is Chief Okafor, yes, but Amara has built her own reputation in fashion. Her work is really impressive. She's creating economic opportunities for traditional weavers while building an international brand. I thought you might want to meet her. Maybe discuss potential collaborations between architecture and fashion." Something in Sarah's tone suggested she had more than professional collaboration in mind. But David was intrigued by the idea of meeting someone who shared his commitment to preserving African culture while building for the future. "All right," he said, closing his laptop. "Book us flights to Accra. It sounds like it could be an interesting evening." The reception at the Okafor family compound was a showcase of Ghana's elite society. The sprawling estate in East Legon was decorated with Amara's latest designs, flowing fabrics in rich kente patterns that had been reimagined as contemporary evening wear. Politicians, business leaders, and cultural figures mingled on terraces overlooking manicured gardens, while traditional drummers provided a rhythmic backdrop to conversations conducted in English, Twi, and French. Daniel arrived fashionably late, as was his custom, and immediately found himself surrounded by the usual crowd of associates and admirers. He moved through the reception with practiced ease, making the right comments to the right people, but his attention was caught by a woman standing near the fashion displays, studying the garments with the focused intensity of someone who understood both artistry and craftsmanship. Amara Okafor was 28 years old and possessed the kind of beauty that came from intelligence and passion as much as genetics. Her natural hair was styled in an elegant updo that showcased traditional gold jewelry, and she wore one of her own designs, a dress that somehow managed to be both modern and timeless, sophisticated and rooted in African tradition. "The indigo dyeing technique is fascinating," she was explaining to a small group of admirers. "We work with master dyers in Kano who have been perfecting this craft for generations. Each piece takes weeks to complete, but the depth of color and the way it ages is incomparable to anything produced by industrial methods." Chapter 4. Daniel found himself drawn into the conversation, impressed by Amara's knowledge and passion for her craft. When the group dispersed, he approached her directly. "Daniel Asante," he said, extending his hand. "I have to say, your work is remarkable. The way you've managed to honor traditional techniques while creating something completely contemporary. It's exactly the kind of innovation Africa needs." Amara smiled, and Daniel felt something shift in his chest. "Thank you, Mr. Asante. I know your work as well." Asante Construction has been transforming Accra's skyline. Though I have to admit, I sometimes wonder if we're building fast enough to preserve what makes our cities uniquely African. It was a gentle challenge, delivered with a smile, but Daniel recognized the intelligence behind it. Most people either praised his success uncritically or criticized it out of jealousy. Amara was doing neither. She was engaging with the complexity of development in a way that showed she understood both its benefits and its costs. That's a fair point, Daniel replied. Development without cultural consciousness is just destruction with better marketing. I'd be interested in hearing more of your thoughts on that. As they talked, Daniel found himself genuinely engaged in a way he hadn't experienced in years. Amara challenged his assumptions, shared insights that made him think differently about his work, and did it with a warmth and humor that made the conversation feel less like a debate and more like a dance. Across the reception, David had arrived and was having his own moment of recognition. He had spotted Amara from across the garden and felt an immediate connection that went beyond professional interest. There was something about the way she moved, the way she listened to people with complete attention, the way she seemed to embody the perfect balance between confidence and humility that he had been searching for without realizing it. "That's her," Sarah said, following David's gaze. "Amara Okafor. Should I introduce you?" David nodded, unable to take his eyes off the woman who seemed to radiate the kind of purposeful energy he recognized in himself. As they approached, he could hear her conversation with a tall, well-dressed man who looked vaguely familiar. "Excuse me," Sarah interjected politely. "Miss Okafor? I'm Sarah Williams from Mensa Architectural Design in Lagos, and this is David Mensah. We were hoping to meet you and discuss your approach to cultural preservation in contemporary design." Amara turned toward them, and when her eyes met David's, both felt an immediate recognition that went beyond the physical. It was as if they had been looking for each other without knowing it, and had finally found what they hadn't even realized they were missing. Chapter 5. "Mr. Mensah," Amara said, her voice slightly breathless. "I know your work. The community center in Ikeja. It's beautiful, the way you integrated traditional Yoruba architectural elements with modern sustainability features. It's exactly what I try to do with textiles." David felt his heart race. Not only was she beautiful and accomplished, but she understood his work in a way that few people did. "Thank you. And your latest collection? The way you're creating economic opportunities for traditional craftspeople while building an international market? It's inspiring." Daniel, who had been momentarily forgotten in the introduction, cleared his throat. "I don't believe we've been introduced," he said to David, extending his hand. "Daniel Asante, Asante Construction." "David Mensah," David replied, shaking Daniel's hand. As their fingers touched, both men felt a strange jolt of recognition, as if they were looking into a mirror that reflected not their appearance, but something deeper and more fundamental. "Mensah," Daniel repeated thoughtfully. "Are you from Ghana originally?" "No, Lagos born and raised," David replied, "though my mother is from this region, Grace Mensah." Something flickered across Daniel's face. A moment of confusion or recognition that he couldn't quite place. "Grace Mensah?" he repeated slowly. "That name, it sounds familiar." Before David could respond, Chief Okafor approached their group, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Amara, my dear, I see you've met some of our distinguished guests. Mr. Asante, your father speaks very highly of you. And Mr. Mensah, welcome to Ghana. I understand you're doing impressive work in sustainable architecture." As the conversation continued, Amara found herself torn between two very different but equally compelling men. Daniel represented everything her family expected: success, stability, the right social connections. But David stirred something in her soul that she had never experienced before: a sense of shared purpose and understanding that went beyond social compatibility. The evening progressed with both men vying for Amara's attention, though neither was fully conscious of the competition. Daniel used his natural charm and social confidence, regaling her with stories of his business successes and his vision for Ghana's development. David engaged her in deeper conversations about art, culture, and the responsibility of successful Africans to lift up their communities. As the reception wound down, Amara found herself walking in the garden with David, while Daniel was occupied with business conversations. The night air was warm and fragrant with jasmine, and the sounds of the party seemed distant and unimportant. Chapter 6. "I have to ask," David said as they paused beside a fountain. "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's expectations instead of your own dreams?" Amara looked at him with surprise. It was exactly the question she had been asking herself for months, as her father's hints about marriage and family duty had become increasingly direct. "Every day," she admitted. "I love my work, and I'm grateful for the opportunities my family has given me. But sometimes I wonder what my life would look like if I made choices based purely on what I wanted, not what was expected of me." David stepped closer, and in the moonlight, Amara could see the intensity in his eyes. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and danger. Amara knew that her answer could change everything, that this moment was a crossroads that would determine the direction of her life. "I want," she said slowly, "to find someone who understands that success without purpose is just elaborate emptiness. I want to build something meaningful with someone who shares my values, not just my social status." David reached for her hand, and when their fingers intertwined, both felt a connection that was electric and undeniable. "I think," he said softly, "we might want the same things." The promise whispered in that garden was one of love and partnership, but it was a promise that would be tested by forces neither of them could have anticipated. For in the complex web of West African society, where family, duty, and tradition carried as much weight as personal desire, some promises were easier to make than to keep. And somewhere in the shadows of that same garden, Daniel Asante watched the woman he was beginning to care for fall in love with a man who looked disturbingly familiar. Chapter 7. Over the next few weeks, David returned to Lagos with Amara's contact information and a heart full of possibilities he had never dared to imagine. Their phone conversation stretched late into the night, covering everything from architectural philosophy to childhood memories, from dreams of transforming Africa to intimate fears about living up to their potential. "I've never met anyone who thinks the way you do," Amara confessed during one of their calls, curled up in her design studio while David worked late in his Lagos office. "You see possibilities where other people see problems. You see beauty where others see only function." "I was thinking the same thing about you," David replied, his voice warm with affection. "Your designs don't just preserve tradition, they transform it into something that can compete in the global market while still honoring its roots. That takes vision and courage." Their connection deepened with each conversation, each shared idea, each moment of understanding that felt like recognition of something they had been searching for their entire lives. David began making regular trips to Accra, ostensibly for business meetings, but really to spend time with Amara. They would walk through the markets of Makola, discussing the intersection of commerce and culture, or sit in quiet cafes in Osu, talking about their dreams for the future. But their growing romance was taking place against a backdrop of family expectations and social pressures that neither fully appreciated until it was too late to navigate them easily. Chief Okafor had been watching his daughter's interactions with both men, with the calculating eye of a politician who understood that personal relationships were also political alliances. Daniel Asante represented everything he wanted for Amara. A connection to one of Ghana's most successful business families, a man with the resources and social standing to enhance the Okafor family's influence, and someone who moved in the same circles of power that Chief Okafor had spent decades cultivating. David Mensah, while accomplished and clearly intelligent, was an outsider with no family connections in Ghana's political establishment. His work was admirable, but he didn't offer the kind of strategic advantages that Chief Okafor was looking for in a son-in-law. Amara, Chief Okafor said one evening as they shared dinner on the terrace of the family compound. I've been thinking about your future. You are 28 now, accomplished in your career, and it's time to consider marriage. Amara felt her stomach tighten. She had been dreading this conversation, knowing it was inevitable, but hoping she could delay it until she had figured out how to reconcile her feelings for David with her family's expectations. Papa, I'm focused on expanding the business right now. The international orders are growing, and I'm planning to open a showroom in New York next year. All the more reason to have the right kind of partner, Chief Okafor replied smoothly. Someone who understands business, who can support your ambitions while bringing his own resources to the partnership. Someone like Daniel Asante. The name hung in the air, like a challenge. Amara had continued to see Daniel socially, partly because their families moved in the same circles and partly because she genuinely liked him as a person. He was intelligent, successful, and undeniably attractive. Under different circumstances, she might have been able to develop feelings for him, but her heart had already been claimed by David, and she couldn't imagine settling for anything less than the profound connection she had found with the Lagos architect. Daniel is a good man, Amara said carefully. But Papa, I'm not in love with him. Chief Okafor set down his fork and looked at his daughter with the expression of a man who had spent his career negotiating complex political deals. Love is a luxury, my dear. Compatibility, respect, and shared goals are the foundations of successful marriages. Love can grow from those things, but it rarely survives without them. And what if I've already found someone I love? Someone who shares my values and understands my work? You mean the architect from Lagos? Chief Okafor said, his tone neutral, but his eyes sharp. David Mensah seems like a decent young man. But Amara, you must think practically. What does he offer you? What does he offer our family? Marriage isn't just about personal feelings. It is about building alliances, creating opportunities, strengthening communities. Amara felt tears prick at her eyes. So my happiness does not matter? Your happiness matters enormously, Chief Okafor said, his voice softening. But I've lived long enough to know that happiness built on impractical foundations doesn't last. Daniel Asante can give you everything. Security, status, children who will inherit advantages from both families. Can your architect offer you the same? Chapter 8. Meanwhile, in Accra, Daniel was having his own conversation with his father about marriage and family expectations. Samuel Asante had been pleased by his son's apparent interest in Amara Okafor, seeing it as evidence that Daniel was finally ready to settle down with an appropriate partner. "The Okafors are good people," Samuel said as they reviewed construction contracts in his home office. "Chief Okafor has been a valuable ally over the years, and Amara is exactly the kind of wife who would be an asset to your career. Beautiful, accomplished, from the right family." Daniel nodded absently, his mind elsewhere. He had been thinking about Amara constantly since the reception, but his feelings were complicated by the memory of watching her with David Mensah in the garden. There had been something between them, a connection that Daniel recognized as deeper than anything he had experienced with Amara himself. "There's something I need to tell you," Daniel said suddenly. At the reception, Amara met someone else, an architect from Lagos named David Mensah. I think she might have feelings for him." Samuel's expression hardened. "Mensah? That name is familiar." He said his mother was Grace Mensah, from this region originally. The color drained from Samuel's face, and he set down his pen with a hand that trembled slightly. "Grace Mensah?" he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Papa, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Samuel stood up abruptly and walked to the window, his back to his son. For a long moment, he said nothing, wrestling with memories and secrets he had buried for over 30 years. "Tell me about this David Mensah," Samuel said finally. "What does he look like?" Daniel was puzzled by his father's reaction, but he described David as accurately as he could. His height, his build, his facial features, the intelligent intensity in his eyes. With each detail, Samuel felt the weight of his past pressing down on him like a physical force. The description could have been of Daniel himself, or of Samuel at that age. The resemblance was too strong to be coincidental, especially combined with the name, Grace Mensah. "Papa, what's wrong? You're scaring me." Samuel turned back to his son, his face grave. "Daniel, there are things about our family history that I've never told you. Things I hoped would never become relevant." "What kind of things?" Samuel sat down heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 65 years. 32 years ago, I made choices that I've regretted every day since. I was married to your stepmother, but I was also involved with my secretary, Grace Mensah. She was young, intelligent, beautiful. I convinced myself that I loved her, but I was really just being selfish. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. What happened? She became pregnant with twins. Chapter 9. The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. Twins? I panicked. I was already married. My political connections were crucial to the business, and the scandal would have destroyed everything I had built. So I made Grace an offer. I would support her financially if she left Ghana and never contacted me again. I told her she could keep one child, and I would take the other one and raise him as my adopted son. Daniel stared at his father in horror. You separated twins? You took a baby from his mother? I told myself I was doing what was best for everyone, Samuel said, his voice heavy with shame. I thought the children would have better opportunities if they were raised separately, in stable homes. I thought Grace would be better off without the burden of raising two children alone. And the child you kept was me? Samuel nodded. I told everyone you were adopted, that your birth mother had died in childbirth. I never told you the truth because I didn't want you to hate me for what I had done. Daniel felt the room spinning around him. Everything he had believed about his identity his family, his origins, was crumbling. So, David Mensah is your twin brother. The revelation hit Daniel with the force of a physical blow. The strange sense of recognition he had felt when shaking David's hand, the familiar features, the inexplicable connection. It all made sense now. But instead of clarity, the truth brought only more confusion and pain. "How could you do this?" Daniel asked, his voice breaking. "How could you tear apart a family like that?" "I was young and scared and selfish," Samuel admitted. "I've lived with the guilt every day since. I've tried to be a good father to you, to give you everything you could possibly want, but I know it doesn't make up for what I took from you." Daniel stood up abruptly, pacing the room like a caged animal. "Does he know? Does David know about me?" "I don't think so." Grace agreed never to tell him about his father or his brother. "As far as I know, she's kept that promise. And now he's in love with the woman I'm supposed to marry," Daniel said bitterly. "This is like something out of a Greek tragedy." Samuel looked at his son with desperate eyes. "Daniel, you can't tell anyone about this. If this information becomes public, it could destroy both our families. Think about what it would do to your business, to the Okafors, to David's career. So I'm supposed to just pretend I don't know that my greatest rival is actually my brother? I'm asking you to think carefully about the consequences of revealing this secret. Sometimes the truth causes more harm than good." But Daniel was no longer listening. His mind was reeling with the implications of what he had learned. Not only did he have a twin brother he had never known existed, but that brother was in love with the woman Daniel was being pressured to marry. The complexity of the situation was overwhelming, and he had no idea how to navigate it without destroying multiple lives in the process. Chapter 10. Over the following weeks, Daniel found himself in an impossible position. He continued to court Amara as his family expected, but every interaction was colored by his knowledge of her feelings for David. He watched her try to be interested in their conversations, saw her forced smiles when he brought her flowers, noticed the way her eyes lit up when her phone buzzed with messages that he suspected were from his brother. The charade became increasingly painful for everyone involved. Amara was torn between her growing love for David and her family's expectations. She tried to give Daniel a fair chance, hoping that her feelings might change, but every date only confirmed that her heart belonged to someone else. "I feel like I'm living a lie," she confessed to her best friend, Sarah, during one of their regular coffee meetings. "Daniel is everything my family wants for me, and he's genuinely a good person. But when I'm with him, I feel like I'm acting in a play. When I talk to David, I feel like I'm finally being myself." "Then why don't you just tell your father the truth?" Sarah asked. "You're an adult, Amara. You have the right to choose your own husband." "It's not that simple. My father has already started talking to Daniel's father about a formal engagement. There are business deals involved, political alliances. If I refuse to marry Daniel, it won't just affect me. It could damage my father's career and our family's reputation. And if you marry someone you don't love, it could damage your entire life." Amara knew her friend was right, but the weight of family expectations and cultural traditions made it difficult to see a clear path forward. In West African society, marriage was rarely just about the couple involved. It was about families, communities, and the complex web of relationships that held society together. The pressure intensified when Chief Okafor announced that he had arranged a formal engagement ceremony for Amara and Daniel to be held in 6 weeks. The news hit Amara like a physical blow, and she realized that her time for making a choice was running out. That night, she called David in tears. They've set a date, she said without preamble. My father has arranged an engagement ceremony. David, I don't know what to do. David felt his heart break at the pain in her voice. He had known this moment was coming, had seen the signs in her increasing distress over the past weeks. But hearing it confirmed was still devastating. Run away with me, he said impulsively. We'll go to London or New York, or anywhere you want. You can build your fashion business. I can practice architecture. We don't have to live by other people's rules. For a moment, Amara was tempted. The idea of starting fresh somewhere else, of building a life based on love rather than obligation, was incredibly appealing. But she also knew the cost of such a choice. I can't abandon my family, she said finally. My father has spent his entire life building something meaningful. My business employs hundreds of people. I can't just walk away from all of that. Then what do we do? Amara was quiet for a long time, and when she spoke, her voice was heavy with resignation. I think we have to accept that sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes duty has to come first. Amara, please don't do this. Don't marry someone you don't love just because it's what other people expect. David, I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. But I also love my family, and I can't destroy their lives for my own happiness. Maybe my father is right. Maybe love can grow from respect and compatibility. David knew he was losing her, and the knowledge was like a knife in his chest. And what about us? What about everything we've shared? We'll always have what we shared, Amara said, tears streaming down her face. But we can't build a future on it. I'm sorry, David. I'm so sorry. After she hung up, David sat in his office, staring out at the Lagos skyline, feeling like his world had collapsed. He had found the woman of his dreams, only to lose her to family obligations and social expectations that he couldn't compete with. Meanwhile, in Accra, Daniel was dealing with his own emotional turmoil. He knew that Amara didn't love him, knew that she was sacrificing her happiness for her family's expectations. The knowledge made him feel like he was participating in a cruel charade, but he also didn't know how to extricate himself without revealing secrets that could destroy multiple families. The engagement ceremony was set for a month away, and as the date approached, all three participants felt trapped by circumstances beyond their control. Amara threw herself into wedding preparations with grim determination, trying to convince herself that she could learn to be happy with Daniel. Daniel went through the motions of a happy groom-to-be, while wrestling with guilt about his brother and his role in separating Amara from the man she truly loved. And David, heartbroken and angry, threw himself into his work with renewed intensity, trying to forget the woman he loved and the future he had lost. None of them could have predicted that their carefully constructed facades were about to be shattered by the arrival of a man who had been watching their drama unfold with calculating interest. Chapter 11. What none of the celebration's participants knew was that among the guests was a man who had been watching the proceedings with particular interest. Victor Adebayo was a successful businessman in his own right, but his success had been built on a foundation of corruption, intimidation, and the strategic use of information as a weapon. He had been investigating both the Asante and Mensah families for months, looking for leverage he could use to acquire their businesses at below market prices. Victor had built his empire by identifying successful companies with hidden vulnerabilities, then exploiting those weaknesses to force advantageous buyouts or partnerships. He had his eye on both Asante Construction and Mensah Architectural Design, seeing them as valuable additions to his portfolio of West African businesses. His research into the Asante family had uncovered the connection to Grace Mensah, and further investigation had revealed the existence of David Mensah in Lagos. Victor was a patient man who understood that the most valuable information was often the kind that people would pay handsomely to keep secret. "Congratulations on your engagement," Victor said to Daniel during the reception. He smiled friendly, but his eyes calculating. "Your father must be very proud. Samuel has built quite an empire from humble beginnings." "Thank you," Daniel replied politely, though something about Victor's tone made him uncomfortable. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced." "Victor Adebayo, Adebayo Enterprises. We are in import-export with interests in construction materials and architectural services. I've been following your work with great interest." Daniel felt a chill of recognition. He had heard of Adebayo Enterprises. They had a reputation for aggressive business practices and a tendency to acquire competitors through methods that weren't always entirely legal. "I'd love to discuss some potential partnerships," Victor continued. "Perhaps we could meet next week? I have some ideas that might be mutually beneficial." Before Daniel could respond, Victor had moved on to another group of guests, leaving Daniel with an uneasy feeling that he couldn't quite shake. Meanwhile, in Lagos, David was indeed working late, but not by choice. His business had been facing increasing pressure over the past month. Permits that should have been routine were being delayed. Suppliers were raising prices unexpectedly, and several potential clients had suddenly withdrawn from projects without explanation. "It's like someone is systematically trying to undermine us," Sarah observed as they reviewed their financial projections. "The timing is too coordinated to be coincidental." David had been thinking the same thing, but he had been too distracted by his personal heartbreak to focus properly on the business threats. The engagement ceremony had taken place that afternoon, and despite his best efforts to ignore it, he couldn't stop thinking about Amara promising herself to another man. "We need to figure out who's behind this," David said, forcing himself to concentrate on the immediate crisis. "Our cash flow can't sustain these kinds of disruptions much longer." "I've been asking around," Sarah said carefully. "There are rumors about a company called Adebayo Enterprises making inquiries about us. They've been asking questions about our client base, our financial situation, our key personnel." David looked up sharply. "Adebayo Enterprises? I've never heard of them." "They are based in Accra, but they have operations throughout West Africa. Import-export, construction materials, some architectural services. Their reputation is questionable." "Questionable? How?" "They have a pattern of targeting successful smaller companies, creating financial pressure through various means, then offering to buy them out at below market prices. It's all technically legal, but barely." David felt a surge of anger. His company represented years of hard work, dreams of building a better Africa through thoughtful design, and the hopes of dozens of employees who depended on him for their livelihoods. The idea that someone was trying to destroy all of that for profit was infuriating. "What do we know about the owner?" "Victor Adebayo, mid-50s, very wealthy, very connected politically. He's known for being ruthless, but also very careful to stay within the bounds of the law." David made a mental note to research Victor Adebayo more thoroughly. If someone was trying to destroy his business, he needed to understand who he was fighting and what weapons they were using. Chapter 12. Back in Accra, Daniel was having his own problems with mysterious business disruptions. Several major contracts had been delayed due to regulatory concerns. Suppliers were demanding payments in advance for materials that had previously been delivered on credit, and there were rumors that government officials were reconsidering their relationship with Asante Construction. "It's coordinated," Samuel Asante told his son during an emergency meeting in his office. Someone is putting pressure on us from multiple directions simultaneously. This isn't random. Bad luck. Do we have any idea who? I have suspicions. There's a man named Victor Adebayo who's been making inquiries about our business. He approached me last month about a potential partnership, but something about him made me feel uncomfortable. Daniel felt his blood run cold. Victor Adebayo? He was at the engagement ceremony. He mentioned wanting to meet about partnerships. Samuel's expression grew grim. That's not a coincidence. He's probably behind the pressure we've been experiencing. It's a classic intimidation tactic. Create problems, then offer to solve them in exchange for favorable business terms. What do? We fight back, but carefully. Men like Adebayo are dangerous when cornered. Over the following weeks, both brothers found themselves under increasing pressure from Victor's systematic campaign to destabilize their businesses. The attacks were sophisticated and multi-pronged. Financial pressure through delayed payments and increased costs, regulatory harassments through government connections, and reputation damage through carefully planted rumors about their business practices. David was forced to lay off several employees, a decision that broke his heart and reinforced his sense that he was failing the people who depended on him. Daniel had to postpone several major projects, damaging relationships with clients and partners that had taken years to build. But perhaps the most painful consequence of Victor's campaign was the way it affected their personal lives. Amara, now officially engaged and planning her wedding, watched helplessly as the stress took its toll on Daniel. He became increasingly distant and preoccupied, their conversations stilted and formal. "Is everything all right?" she asked one evening as they had dinner at an upscale restaurant in Accra. "You seem troubled." Daniel looked at his fiancée, this beautiful, intelligent woman who deserved so much better than the complicated mess his life had become. He wanted to tell her everything about his business problems, about his brother, about the impossible situation they were all trapped in. But he also knew that revealing any of those truths would only make things worse for everyone involved. "Just business pressures," he said finally. "Nothing you need to worry about." But Amara could see through his careful facade. She had spent enough time with him to recognize the signs of deeper distress, and she found herself wishing she could offer him the kind of emotional support that came naturally between people who truly loved each other. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was engaged to a man who was clearly suffering, but she felt powerless to help him because their relationship was built on duty rather than genuine intimacy. Meanwhile, the man she loved was facing his own struggles in Lagos, and she couldn't even contact him to offer support without betraying her commitment to Daniel. The wedding was scheduled for 2 months away, and as the date approached, all three of them felt increasingly trapped by circumstances that seemed to be spiraling beyond their control. It was during this period of mounting pressure that Victor Adebayo decided to make his move. He had gathered enough information about both families to construct a devastating weapon, and he was ready to use it to achieve his business objectives. Chapter 13. The wedding was 3 weeks away when Victor Adebayo decided to play his final card. He had spent months applying pressure to both the Asante and Mensa businesses, but neither Daniel nor David had responded to his overtures for partnership in the way he had hoped. Both men had proven more resilient than he had anticipated, finding ways to weather their financial storms he had created and maintain their independence. It was time for a more direct approach. Victor chose the venue carefully, the monthly meeting of the Ghana Business Council, where the country's most influential entrepreneurs gathered to discuss economic policy and network with government officials. Both Samuel Asante and Chief Okafor would be in attendance, along with dozens of other powerful figures who could amplify whatever message Victor chose to deliver. The meeting was held in the ballroom of the Golden Tulip Hotel in Accra, with round tables arranged to facilitate conversation and deal-making. Victor had positioned himself strategically, close enough to the Asante and Okafor tables to ensure his words would be overheard by the right people. "Samuel," Victor called out during a break in the formal presentations, his voice carrying across the room with calculated casualness. "I was just telling Chief Okafor about your son's upcoming wedding. Such a beautiful couple, Daniel and Amara. Though I have to say, I was surprised to learn about Daniel's family history." Samuel felt his blood turn to ice. Across the room, Chief Okafor looked up with polite interest, unaware that he was about to hear information that would change everything. "Family history?" Chief Okafor asked, moving closer to their conversation. "Oh, you know about Daniel's twin brother, of course," Victor continued, his tone suggesting that this was common knowledge rather than a devastating secret. "David Mensah, the architect in Lagos. Remarkable how they ended up in similar fields despite being raised apart. Though I suppose talent runs in families, even when those families are complicated." The words hit the room like a bomb. Samuel's face went pale. Chief Okafor's expression shifted from polite interest to shock, and the conversations at nearby tables gradually died as people realized they were witnessing something significant. "I'm sorry," Chief Okafor said slowly. "Did you say twin brother?" Victor smiled with the satisfaction of a man who had just played a winning hand. "Oh dear, have I said something I shouldn't have? I assumed everyone knew about the situation with Grace Mensah. Such an interesting story. The secretary who had twins with her married boss agreed to give up one child in exchange for financial support. Very dramatic. Very West African soap opera." Samuel stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Victor, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Has there?" Victor interrupted smoothly. "Because my research suggests that David Mensah of Lagos is indeed Daniel Asante's twin brother. Separated at birth, when their father chose to keep one child and send the other away with his mother. It's all quite well documented, if you know where to look." The room had gone completely silent now, with dozens of Ghana's most powerful people listening to a family secret being exposed in the most public way possible. Chief Okafor looked like he had been struck by lightning, his mind racing through the implications of what he was hearing. "And the truly fascinating part," Victor continued, clearly enjoying the chaos he was creating, "is that David Mensah is apparently the man your daughter was involved with before her engagement to Daniel. Quite a coincidence, wouldn't you say? Two brothers, separated at birth, falling in love with the same woman." Chief Okafor turned to Samuel with an expression of fury and betrayal. "Is this true?" Samuel looked around the room at the dozens of faces staring at him expectantly, realizing that 30 years of carefully guarded secrets had just been destroyed in a matter of minutes. There was no point in denying what Victor had already revealed. "Yes," he said quietly, "it's true." The admission sent shockwaves through the room. Chief Okafor's face flushed with anger as he processed the full implications of what he had learned. "You mean to tell me," Chief Okafor said, his voice dangerously quiet, "that you allowed my daughter to become engaged to your son while knowing that she was in love with his twin brother? You let us plan a wedding based on lies and deception?" "Chief Okafor, please, let me explain." "Explain what? How you separated twin brothers? How you kept this secret while my daughter's heart was breaking? How you were willing to let her marry the wrong man rather than reveal the truth?" Chapter 14. The confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of Daniel, who had been attending a construction site meeting and had rushed to the hotel after receiving frantic phone calls from several people who had witnessed the scene. "Papa, what's happening?" Daniel asked as he entered the ballroom, immediately sensing the tension in the room. Victor turned to him with a smile that was pure malice. "Ah, Daniel, perfect timing. We were just discussing your family tree, specifically your twin brother, David Mensah, in Lagos." Daniel felt the floor drop out from under him. The secret he had been carrying for months, the knowledge that had been eating away at him, was now public knowledge. Worse, it had been revealed in the most damaging way possible, in front of people who could destroy both families' reputations and business relationships. "You scum," Daniel said, his usual composure finally cracking. "What do you want?" "What I've always wanted," Victor replied calmly. "A reasonable business arrangement. Your construction company and your brother's architectural firm would make excellent additions to my portfolio. I'm prepared to offer fair market value for both businesses." "And if we refuse?" Victor gestured around the room, where dozens of influential people were still staring at the unfolding drama. "Well, I imagine this kind of scandal could be quite damaging to your reputations. Family secrets, broken engagements, questions about business ethics. It would be a shame if such stories found their way into the newspapers." Daniel realized with crystal clarity that Victor had orchestrated everything: the business pressure, the public revelation, the timing of his offer. It was an elaborate extortion scheme designed to force both brothers to sell their companies at below market prices. "You planned all of this?" Daniel said. "The business problems, the pressure on David's company, even revealing the secret here and now." "I prefer to think of it as creating opportunities," Victor replied. "You both have successful businesses that would benefit from my resources and connections. I'm simply providing motivation for you to see the advantages of partnership." Chief Okafor, who had been listening to this exchange with growing understanding, stepped forward. "Are you telling me that you've been manipulating my daughter's engagement as part of a business scheme?" "Not manipulating," Victor said smoothly. "Simply taking advantage of existing circumstances. Though, I have to say, the irony is delicious. Two brothers competing for the same woman without knowing they are related. It's like something out of a Greek tragedy." The casual cruelty of Victor's words, the way he spoke about their pain as if it were entertainment, finally pushed Daniel past his breaking point. "You want a war?" Daniel said, his voice deadly quiet. "You've got one. But you made one crucial mistake." "And what's that?" "You assumed that revealing our connection would divide us. But you've actually given us something we never had before: a reason to work together." At that moment, as if summoned by fate, David Mensah walked into the ballroom. He had flown to Accra after receiving a panicked phone call from Sarah, who had heard rumors about the scene at the business council meeting. He had come expecting to find Daniel in crisis, but he hadn't expected to walk into the middle of a public confrontation. The room fell silent again as people realized they were witnessing the first meeting between the twin brothers since their truth had been revealed. David and Daniel looked at each other across the crowded room, seeing their own futures reflected in a face that was both familiar and strange. "David," Daniel said, his voice carrying a mixture of relief and determination, "I'm glad you're here. We need to talk." David walked through the crowd, ignoring the stares and whispers, until he stood face to face with his twin brother. Up close, the resemblance was unmistakable. They had the same eyes, the same jawline, the same way of carrying themselves that spoke of intelligence and determination. So it's true, David said quietly. We are brothers. Yes, Daniel replied, and we have a common enemy. David turned to look at Victor, understanding immediately who was responsible for the chaos that had engulfed both their lives. You're the one who's been trying to destroy our businesses? I prefer to think of it as market consolidation, Victor said, though his confidence was beginning to waver as he watched the two brothers stand together. And my offer still stands. I'm prepared to buy both companies at fair market value. Here is a counter-offer, David said, his voice carrying the same quiet intensity as his brother's. Get out of our lives. Stop interfering with our businesses, and maybe we won't destroy you. Victor laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it. You're hardly in a position to make threats. Your reputations are in ruins. Your engagement is destroyed. Your family secrets are public knowledge. What exactly do you think you can do to me? Daniel and David exchanged a look, and in that moment, they understood each other perfectly. They had been raised apart, had lived different lives, had never known of each other's existence, but they shared the same blood, the same values, and the same determination to protect what they had built. We're going to do what we should have done from the beginning, Daniel said. We're going to work together. The declaration sent a ripple of excitement through the room. The business leaders who had been watching the drama unfold realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. The formation of an alliance that could reshape the West African construction and architectural industries. But the most important person in the room wasn't thinking about business implications. Chief Okafor was looking at his daughter's fiancé and the man she truly loved. Seeing them stand together as brothers for the first time and realizing that everything he thought he knew about the situation had just changed. The revelation of the family secret had been intended to destroy them all. Instead, it had created the possibility for a different kind of resolution. One based on truth rather than deception, on choice rather than obligation, and on the power of family bonds that had survived 30 years of separation. The cracks in their carefully constructed facades had finally given way, but instead of collapse, they had revealed the foundation for something stronger and more honest than any of them had dared to imagine. Chapter 15. The aftermath of Victor's public revelation was swift and decisive. Within hours of the confrontation at the Ghana Business Council meeting, the story had spread throughout Accra's business community and beyond. But rather than the scandal and destruction Victor had anticipated, the response was something entirely different. The business leaders who had witnessed the scene were impressed by the dignity with which the brothers had handled the crisis. Instead of turning on each other or collapsing under the pressure, Daniel and David had immediately recognized their common enemy and formed an alliance. In a region where family loyalty and business acumen were equally valued, their response was seen as evidence of strong character rather than weakness. I've never seen anything like it, one prominent businessman told his colleagues over drinks that evening. Two men who had every reason to hate each other, choosing to work together instead. That's the kind of leadership Africa needs. The immediate priority was dealing with Victor Adebayo's threats and business manipulations. Daniel and David spent the next 3 days in intensive meetings, sharing information about the attacks on their respective companies and developing a coordinated response. He's been playing us against each other without us even knowing it, David observed as they reviewed the timeline of Victor's campaign. While he was pressuring my business in Lagos, he was simultaneously attacking yours in Accra. We were both so focused on our individual problems that we never saw the bigger picture. But now we do, Daniel replied, and we have resources he doesn't know about. Working together, the brothers were able to trace the network of corruption and intimidation that Victor had used to pressure their businesses. They documented bribes paid to government officials, identified suppliers who had been coerced into raising prices, and uncovered a pattern of illegal business practices that stretched across multiple countries. "We have enough evidence to destroy him," David said as they compiled their findings. "The question is whether we want to go that route or find a more elegant solution." Daniel considered the options. "He tried to destroy our families and our businesses for profit. He deserves whatever consequences come his way. But I think there's a better approach." The brothers decided to fight Victor using his own weapons: information, pressure, and strategic alliances. They reached out to other business leaders who had been targeted by Victor's schemes, building a coalition of companies that had been damaged by his practices. They shared their evidence with journalists and government investigators, creating a web of legal and public relations problems that would keep Victor occupied for years. But their most effective weapon was their newfound partnership itself. The combination of Daniel's construction expertise and David's architectural vision created opportunities that neither could have achieved alone. Within weeks of their alliance, they had secured 3 major projects that would have been impossible for either company to handle independently. "Asante Mensa Construction and Design," David said, reading the letterhead they had created for their joint venture. "It has a nice ring to it." "Our grandfather would be proud," Daniel replied, then paused. "I mean, our father's father. I'm still getting used to the idea that we share family history." Chapter 16. The relationship between the brothers was complex and evolving. They had to navigate not only their business partnership, but also the emotional reality of discovering a sibling they had never known existed. There were moments of awkwardness, times when their different upbringings and perspectives created friction, but there was also an underlying connection that felt both natural and profound. "Sometimes I look at you and feel like I'm looking in a mirror," David admitted during one of their late-night planning sessions. "Not just physically, but the way you think about problems, the way you approach challenges. It's like we were programmed with the same software but installed on different computers." "I know what you mean," Daniel replied. "When you were explaining your vision for sustainable architecture, I found myself finishing your sentences. It's unsettling and comforting at the same time." But the most complicated aspect of their new relationship was the question of Amara. The engagement had been officially called off the day after Victor's revelation, when Chief Okafor announced that he couldn't proceed with a wedding based on deception and manipulation. But the question of what would happen next remained unresolved. Amara had been devastated by the public exposure of her private feelings, but she had also felt a strange sense of relief. For months, she had been trapped between duty and desire, forced to choose between her family's expectations and her own heart. The revelation of the brothers' connection had freed her from that impossible choice, but it had also left her uncertain about the future. "I need time," she told both brothers when they met to discuss the situation. "I need to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be what everyone else expects me to be." Daniel, who had come to understand that his feelings for Amara were based more on admiration and social compatibility than genuine love, was the first to speak. "Amara, I care about you deeply, and I think under different circumstances, we could have had a good marriage. But I've watched you with David, and I've seen the way you light up when you talk about him. I've never inspired that kind of joy in you, and you deserve to be with someone who does." David looked at his brother with gratitude and respect. "Daniel, are you sure? I don't want to come between you and—" "You're not coming between us," Daniel interrupted. "You're helping me see clearly for the first time in months. I was so focused on meeting everyone's expectations that I forgot to ask myself what I actually wanted. "And what do you want?" Amara asked quietly. Daniel smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached his eyes. "I want to build something meaningful with my brother. I want to create a business that makes a real difference in Africa. And I want both of you to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include me in the way we originally planned." Chapter 17. The conversation marked a turning point for all three of them. Over the following weeks, Daniel threw himself into the business partnership with David, finding fulfillment in work that combined his practical skills with his brother's creative vision. Amara and David began the delicate process of rebuilding their relationship on a foundation of honesty rather than secrecy. "I was so afraid that loving you would mean betraying my family," Amara confessed during one of their walks along the beach in Accra. "I never imagined that the truth could actually bring everyone together." "Neither did I," David replied. "I thought I had lost you forever when you got engaged to Daniel. I never dreamed that he would turn out to be my brother, or that he would be generous enough to step aside for our happiness." The resolution of their personal drama was paralleled by the resolution of their business problems. Victor Adebayo, faced with mounting legal troubles and the loss of his leverage over the brothers, was forced to abandon his schemes and focus on defending himself against multiple investigations. His business empire, built on corruption and intimidation, began to crumble as his victims came forward with evidence of his crimes. "Justice has a way of catching up with people like Victor," Chief Okafor observed during a family dinner 6 months after the revelation. "He thought he could manipulate everyone and everything for his own benefit, but he underestimated the power of truth and family loyalty." The dinner was taking place at the Okafor family compound, but the guest list had expanded to include the entire extended family that had been created by the revelation of the brothers' connection. Samuel Asante was there, still wrestling with guilt over his past choices, but grateful for the opportunity to build relationships with both his sons. Grace Mensah had flown in from Lagos, finally able to acknowledge her connection to the Asante family after 30 years of secrecy. "I never thought I would see this day," Grace said, looking around the table at her son David, her son's twin brother Daniel, and the woman who would soon become her daughter-in-law. "When I agreed to give up Daniel all those years ago, I thought I was losing half my family forever. Instead, I was just delaying our reunion." Samuel reached across the table to take Grace's hand. "I owe you an apology that's 30 years overdue. I was selfish and cowardly, and I caused pain that could have been avoided if I had been brave enough to face the consequences of my choices." "We all made choices we regret," Grace replied gently. "But look what came from those choices. 2 successful, honorable men who are now working together to build something beautiful. Maybe everything happened the way it was supposed to happen." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Amara and David, who had been walking in the garden and had returned with news they wanted to share. "We have an announcement," Amara said, her face glowing with happiness. "David has asked me to marry him, and I've said yes." The table erupted in celebration, with everyone talking at once and offering congratulations. But the most meaningful moment came when Daniel stood up and embraced his brother. "I'm happy for you both," Daniel said, and everyone could hear the sincerity in his voice. "You belong together, and I am honored to be part of your family." Chapter 18. The wedding took place 6 months later, in a ceremony that was both intimate and grand, traditional and contemporary. It was held on the beach in Accra, with the Atlantic Ocean providing a backdrop for vows that had been tested by separation, strengthened by truth, and blessed by the support of 2 families that had become one. Amara wore a dress of her own design that incorporated textiles from both Ghana and Nigeria, symbolizing the union of two cultures and two families. David wore traditional kente cloth that had been woven by craftsmen from both countries, representing the bridge between his Ghanaian heritage and his Nigerian upbringing. Daniel served as his brother's best man, a role that would have been impossible to imagine a year earlier, but now felt completely natural. In his speech at the reception, he reflected on the journey that had brought them all together. A year ago, I thought I knew who I was and what I wanted, Daniel said to the gathered guests. I thought success meant achieving goals that other people had set for me. And I thought love meant finding someone who fit into the life I had already planned. But sometimes God has different plans for us. And always, those plans are better than anything we could have imagined for ourselves. He looked at David and Amara, who were sitting at the head table with their hands intertwined, their faces glowing with happiness. My brother and his wife have taught me that the most important things in life can't be planned or controlled. Love finds its own way. Families create themselves through choice as much as blood. And sometimes, the greatest gifts come disguised as the greatest challenges. The speech was met with enthusiastic applause, but the most meaningful response came from David, who stood up and embraced his twin brother in front of all their friends and family. Thank you, David whispered, for giving me back my family and my future. The celebration continued late into the night, with traditional drummers and contemporary musicians providing a soundtrack for dancing that brought together multiple generations and cultures. As the evening wound down, the core family members gathered on the beach, watching the waves roll in under a canopy of stars. So what's next for the Asante Mensah Empire? Chief Okafor asked with a smile. We're expanding into Nigeria, Daniel replied. David's connections in Lagos, combined with our resources from Ghana, will allow us to take on projects that neither of us could handle alone. And we're developing a new model for African architecture and construction, David added. Buildings that honor traditional designs while incorporating modern sustainability features. We want to prove that development doesn't have to mean abandoning our cultural heritage. It sounds like you're building more than just buildings, Grace observed. You're building a legacy. As the family gradually dispersed, heading back to the house or to their hotels, Daniel and David found themselves alone on the beach, where their story had taken so many unexpected turns. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Victor hadn't revealed our connection? David asked. Daniel considered the question. Sometimes, but I think the truth would have come out eventually. Secrets that big have a way of surfacing, especially when they involve people who are meant to be in each other's lives. Do you think we would have figured it out on our own? Maybe. We kept noticing similarities, kept feeling like we had met before, and we were both drawn to the same woman, which suggests we have similar taste in more than just architecture. Chapter 19. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sound of the waves and processing the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. I'm glad it happened the way it did, David said finally. If we had grown up together, we might have taken our relationship for granted. Having to find each other as adults, having to choose to be brothers, it makes the connection feel more precious. I agree, Daniel replied, and I'm glad we had to fight for it. The best things in life are worth fighting for. As they walked back toward the house, both brothers felt a deep sense of completion. They had found their family, built their businesses, and created a foundation for the future that was stronger than anything they could have achieved alone. The blood that bound them had been divided by fear and circumstance 30 years earlier, but it had ultimately proven stronger than the forces that had tried to keep them apart. Their story had begun with a secret pact made in desperation, but it had become a legacy of truth, love, and the unbreakable bonds that connect us to the people we are meant to find. In the years that followed, the Asante Mensa Partnership would become one of West Africa's most successful construction and architectural firms, known not just for their innovative designs and quality work, but for their commitment to community development and cultural preservation. Their projects would span multiple countries, creating jobs, preserving traditions, and proving that African businesses could compete on the global stage while staying true to their roots. But perhaps their greatest achievement was the family they had built together. A family that had been broken by secrets and reunited by truth. That had been tested by manipulation and strengthened by loyalty. That had been founded on duty and transformed by love. The legacy of their story would inspire other families to choose honesty over convenience, other businesses to prioritize values over profit, and other couples to fight for love even when the odds seemed impossible. And in the end, that legacy proved that sometimes the most beautiful things in life grow from the most difficult circumstances, and that the bonds that truly matter are the ones we choose to honor, regardless of the cost. The end. Thank you for listening to Soulmates by Tutu Sene. Please like, subscribe, and share with friends and family. Please visit our sister channels, Bible in Music and Tutu Sene Yoruba Bible, also on YouTube. This book was narrated by Brian Okoye.